Alara thought she was damaged goods until Jake Jones made her an offer. She expected a loveless marriage. But when bullets start flying on their wedding night, she realizes his request for an heir wasn't about ego, it was about survival. Now, she must fight for the man who just put a target on her back. The marriage broker's office smelled of old paper and crushed hopes, a scent Alara Vance had grown sickeningly familiar with. She sat in the corner chair, her fingers knotted together in her lap, watching younger women sweep past in bright skirts and nervous smiles. They lined up before cattle buyers and ranch hands like livestock on display, each girl hoping today would be the day someone chose her. Alara had been coming here for 3 long weeks. 3 weeks of watching girl after girl get selected while she faded into the wallpaper. At 26, she was practically ancient out here on the frontier. The men made their judgments openly. Too thin, one muttered. Too quiet, another said, without even meeting her eyes. But she knew the truth. The real reason no one reached for her hand or asked her name. It clung to her like smoke on fabric. Everyone could sense a woman with a past, and no matter how clean her dress or how steady her voice, she couldn't seem to scrub that accusation off her skin. Mrs. Hutchins, the broker, finally approached with a single letter. Her expression said everything about how desperate this option was. The paper was rough, the handwriting blunt. Jake Jones, rancher, Wyoming territory. Seeking wife for practical arrangement. Must be strong, capable, willing to work. Will provide safety, home, security. Requires heir. No romantic expectations, terms negotiable. It read more like a business contract than a marriage proposal. Cold, blunt, stripped of romance. Alara knew she should have felt offended by it. Any other woman might have been. But instead, a quiet relief washed over her like cool water on a fevered brow. No empty declarations. No pretend affection. She knew she hadn't earned in anyone's eyes. Just an honest, unvarnished transaction. For the first time in months, something made sense. So she picked up the pen with steady fingers and signed the agreement that very afternoon. 3 days later, she boarded the westbound train with everything she owned in a single carpet bag. The landscape grew harsher with each passing mile. Green gave way to brown, towns gave way to empty prairie, civilization gave way to something raw and unforgiving. In the dining car, she overheard 2 businessmen in expensive suits discussing land deals in Wyoming. One name kept surfacing, Jake Jones, the stubborn rancher who refused to sell to the Pemberton Railroad at any price. The other man let out a cold, triumphant laugh loud enough to rattle the dust on the windows. "Pemberton always gets what he wants," he crowed. "Jones just doesn't know he's already lost." Alara's breath hitched, a quick flutter of fear tightening in her chest. For a moment, the edges of doubt pressed in on her, but she forced the feeling aside. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it. There was nothing waiting for her back east except shame, whispers, and the slow suffocation of poverty. Whatever Wyoming held for her, hardship, uncertainty, or danger, it could not possibly be worse than what she'd already survived. At least out west, she told herself, she had a fighting chance. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about so many things, but she wouldn't discover just how wrong until she stepped off the train at Sweetwater Station and saw the man who'd bought himself a wife staring at the horizon like he expected it to catch fire at any moment. Jake Jones wasn't looking for a bride, he was recruiting a soldier, and Alara had just enlisted in a war she didn't even know was being fought. Jake Jones didn't bother with introductions, he simply stepped forward and reached for her carpetbag, his movements brisk and wordless. Alara found him waiting at Sweetwater Station with a wagon hitched and a rifle resting across his lap. No greeting, no smile. Just a curt nod toward the back of the wagon, the silent command clear. Get in. She hesitated for a heartbeat. Could this really be Jake Jones? Then the conversation she'd overheard on the train echoed through her mind, and everything fell into place. Without another pause, she climbed up. The wagon lurched forward so quickly her feet hadn't fully settled before they were already rolling away from the station. The silence stretched for an hour, 2 hours. The terrain grew hostile, all jagged rock and sparse grass. Then Alara started noticing things that made her skin crawl. A burned homestead, roof collapsed inward. Another mile down, a cluster of graves with dates from the past 6 months. Fresh crosses, too many of them. When they passed a third abandoned property, she finally spoke. What happened here? Jake's jaw tightened. Progress happened. The Pemberton Railroad wants this valley. People who don't sell have accidents. He said it flatly, like discussing weather. And you didn't sell. No. Why not? Because this land has my father's bones in it, my brother's blood, my uncle's name carved into that barn we just passed. I'm not handing it over to a railroad baron who thinks money makes him God. The weight in his voice told Alara this wasn't stubbornness. It was grief wrapped in fury. She wanted to ask more, but Jake suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. He scanned the ridgeline to their left, eyes narrow. Then he reached under the seat and handed her a pistol. You know how to use this? No, you will by tomorrow. Keep it in your lap until we get home. Home turned out to be a fortress disguised as a ranch. The house sat in a valley with clear sightlines in every direction. The walls were thick timber, the windows narrow with heavy shutters. Rifle slots were cut into the doors. This wasn't a place built for comfort. It was built for siege. Inside, the furniture was sparse and functional, but weapons lined every wall. Rifles, shotguns, revolvers, boxes of ammunition stacked like firewood. Jake watched her take it all in, waiting for the panic, the regret, the tears. Alara felt all those things, she just didn't show them. That night, she lay in a strange bed, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Around midnight, she heard horses, multiple riders circling the property slowly, deliberately. She crept to the window and saw Jake already standing watch, rifle ready, backlit by lamplight. He didn't look scared. He looked tired, like this happened every night. She counted 6 riders before they melted back into darkness. When morning came, Jake was still at that window. He hadn't slept at all. Over cold breakfast, he finally explained what she'd really signed up for. And that's when Alara understood. She hadn't married a rancher. She'd married a man at war. And the enemy was already at the gates. Jake laid everything out over breakfast, speaking in the same steady tone a rancher might use to discuss crop rotation. The land deed, he explained, carried a blood clause dating back to the early territorial days. A direct male heir was required to keep ownership. If he didn't have a son within 18 months, the property would be stripped from him and sent to auction. And everyone knew exactly what that meant. Pemberton's shell companies would swoop in and buy the land for next to nothing. Alara slowly set down her coffee cup, her hand pausing halfway to the table. 18 months? She breathed, the shock flickering across her face before she could hide it. 16 now. My father wrote that clause thinking it protected the land, turned it into a death sentence instead. Jake's voice was flat, emotionless. My brother died trying to defend it. Uncle too. Pemberton's hired guns made it look like accidents, but everyone knows. Then why stay? Why not just leave? Because if I run, they win. If I sell, they win. If I die without an heir, they win. There's only one way to beat them. He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd arrived. His eyes were gray, hard, but not cruel, just honest in a way that felt like a weapon. Will you bear my sons? The question hit her like a physical thing. Not romantic, not gentle, strategic, clinical. He wasn't asking her to love him. He was asking her to be ammunition in a war. Alara should have been furious, should have demanded he take her back to town immediately. Instead, she readjusted her seat and asked, "What happens if I say no? Pemberton wins, the land dies, and you go back east to whatever you were running from," Jake said harshly, with a straight face. The accuracy of that statement stole her breath. He'd seen through her immediately. The shame she carried, the reason no one else wanted her, the past that clung to her like smoke. Jake saw it and didn't care because he needed something she could provide. Not love, not companionship, just biology. She should have felt insulted. Instead, she felt something close to relief. "I'll do it," she said, after being silent for a moment, "but I want something in return." "Name it," he replied. "Teach me to shoot. Teach me to defend this place. If I'm going to raise children in a war zone, I need to know how to keep them alive." Something shifted in Jake's expression, not quite a smile, but close. He stood and walked to the gun cabinet, returning with a rifle smaller than the others. He set it on the table between them. Alara's heart skipped a beat, but she knew there was no going back. "We start today. Every morning before sunrise, you'll learn to load, fire, maintain every weapon in this house. You'll learn to barricade doors in under 2 minutes. You'll learn the difference between warning shots and kill shots," Jake said, his hands moving through the motions, precise, deliberate, as if already walking her through each step of survival. Alara picked up the rifle. The weight of it surprised her, heavier than she'd ever imagined, solid and unforgiving in her hands. "And if Pemberton's men come before I'm ready, then you'd better be a fast learner." Jake's tone held no comfort, no false reassurance, just brutal honesty. She realized then that this wasn't a marriage. It was a partnership built on mutual desperation. And somehow that felt more honest than any love match ever could. 6 weeks passed in a blur of gunpowder and calloused hands. Jake trained Alara like she was joining a militia. Every dawn began the same way. Load the rifle, aim, fire, reload, again. Again, faster. Her shoulders ached from the recoil, her fingers bled from loading magazines, but she got faster, sharper. Jake never praised her, just corrected her mistakes with brutal efficiency. When she finally hit 6 targets in under 10 seconds, he simply nodded and moved to the next drill. Barricading. He'd shout, and she'd have 90 seconds to secure every door and window in the house. She learned which furniture moved fastest, which angles provided cover, where ammunition was stored in every room. It stopped being a home and became a tactical position. He taught her to recognize sounds. Horses approaching meant trouble. One rider could be a neighbor. 3 or more meant Pemberton's men. She learned to count hoofbeats in the dark, to distinguish between warning shots fired high and bullets meant to kill. But during those weeks, something unexpected happened. Alara started seeing past Jake's armor. The way he checked the horizon every 15 minutes like clockwork. The nightmares that woke him gasping at 3 a.m. The old bullet wound in his shoulder he never mentioned but favored when it rained. She also noticed how he watched her, not assessing her body for childbearing like other men had. He studied her reactions under pressure, testing her nerve, measuring something she couldn't quite name. One night, flames erupted from the outer barn. Alara didn't freeze, didn't scream. She grabbed the rifle by her bed and took position at the west window without being told. Jake appeared beside her, ready to give orders, but stopped when he saw she was already scanning for targets. They stood there together in silence while the barn burned. The riders who'd set it stayed just beyond rifle range, watching, waiting for panic that never came. Before dawn broke, the riders had vanished into the shadows. Jake disappeared into his room without a word. An hour later, Alara found a new rifle leaning against her bedroom door, lighter than the one from training, fitted perfectly to her smaller frame. No note, no explanation, but she understood. She'd passed some invisible test, one he'd never spoken aloud but had been watching for all along. That night, she found herself studying Jake the same way he'd been studying her. The tension in his shoulders that never fully released. The way he positioned himself between her and every door. The fact that he always ate after she did, like he expected poison. This man had been at war so long he'd forgotten how to live any other way. And somehow, impossibly, Alara was becoming part of his defensive strategy, not as a wife, as a soldier. She just didn't know yet that the real battle was about to begin. Harrison Pemberton rode in on a Tuesday with 12 armed men flanking him, rifles displayed without shame, and a smile cold enough to turn blood to ice as his eyes swept across the land. His suit was expensive, far too fine for this raw territory, worn like a declaration. He carried himself like he'd already bought and paid for every inch of ground beneath his polished boots. Out here, he wanted them to know, money spoke louder than bullets ever could. Jake met him in the yard, rifle visible, but not raised. Alara watched from the window, her own weapon ready. Pemberton dismounted slowly, deliberately, making a show of being unafraid. "Mr. Jones, I thought it was time we had a civilized conversation. We've got nothing to discuss?" Jake replied with confidence. "I disagree." Pemberton gestured to the valley like he already owned it. "This land is worth $20,000. I'm prepared to write you a check today. You walk away rich, alive, and we all avoid unpleasantness." "Not selling," Jake said flatly, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Pemberton's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I've purchased the cooperation of the territorial judge, the land office, and your sheriff. Your deed expires in 14 months. When it does, this land becomes mine, regardless. I'm offering you a chance to profit from the inevitable," he said, the arrogance dripping from every word like poison from a blade. "Then you'll wait 14 months. The Baron's gaze shifted to the house, landing directly on the window where Alara stood. She fought the urge to step back. "I've noticed your new wife." Pemberton's voice dropped to something almost gentle, which made it worse. "Congratulations on your marriage, though I have to wonder about the timing. Starting a family in such a dangerous area seems unwise. Accidents happen so frequently out here." He smirked, the expression sharp and venomous, as if daring Jake to react. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jake's knuckles went white on the rifle. "You threatening my wife? I'm simply observing that a man can't raise sons from the grave, Mr. Jones. And your blood clause requires living heirs, doesn't it?" Pemberton climbed back onto his horse. "You have 14 months to reconsider. But consider this. If something unfortunate happened to you before an heir is born, the deed reverts immediately. No auction, no waiting period. Directly to me." He tipped his hat toward the window where Alara stood frozen. "Ma'am, such a pleasure to know you'll be joining our community. I do hope you survive long enough to enjoy it," he said with a laugh, the words dressed up as a joke. But the threat beneath them was razor-sharp and unmistakable. The 12 riders followed him out, taking their time, making sure Jake and Alara understood they could return whenever they wanted. That night, Alara finally asked the question burning in her mind. "Why me? Why did you choose me specifically?" Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. "The broker wrote that you'd survived something that should have killed you, said you had eyes that had seen the worst and kept walking." He looked at her directly, closing the distance between them. "I didn't need a woman who'd break when the shooting started. I needed someone who already knew how to survive hell," he said, his voice low and unflinching. Alara nodded, understanding passing between them without another word needed. Alara realized then that Jake hadn't chosen her for her womb. He'd chosen her for her scars. One night, the storm hit like God's own fury. Wind screamed through the valley. Rain fell sideways, and lightning turned night into stuttering daylight. Alara had learned to sleep light, but something beyond the weather pulled her awake. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving carefully despite the storm's cover. She grabbed her rifle and found Jake already awake, standing motionless by the front window. He held up 5 fingers, then 7, then 10, more men than they'd ever seen at once. "This isn't a test run," Jake said quietly. "This is it." Glass shattered in the kitchen. Alara spun, fired twice at the shadow climbing through. The figure dropped back outside with a scream. Her hands were steady. She'd surprised herself. Jake took position at the stairs covering the upper floor. Alara held the ground level. They'd drilled this exact scenario dozens of times, but training and reality felt nothing alike. The thunder masked gunshots. Lightning revealed attackers for split seconds before plunging everything back into darkness. A bullet splintered wood inches from Alara's head. She dropped, rolled, came up firing from a different angle. Jake's voice cut through the chaos. Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. During a lull between lightning strikes, Jake moved down beside her. His face was grim. There's something I didn't tell you about the blood claws. Now? Alara kept her eyes on the windows. If I die before producing an heir, the land doesn't go to auction. It transfers to Pemberton immediately. No waiting period, no legal process. My death ends this tonight. The words hit harder than any bullet. Pemberton wasn't trying to wait out the clock anymore. He was here to eliminate Jake before a child could be conceived. The entire marriage, the entire arrangement rendered pointless by a single bullet. So they'll kill you and I become a widow to nothing. Jake's jaw tightened. I chose wrong. I thought I needed a woman to bear sons. He handed her his father's revolver, the one he'd never let anyone touch. What I needed was a partner who wouldn't run when hell arrived. The revolver felt heavy with meaning. Alara understood what he was really saying. This wasn't about heirs anymore. This was about whether she'd stand or flee. Lightning revealed a figure on the porch. Alara fired. The man went down. If we die tonight, Jake said, we die fighting together. Not as a contract. As equals. Something inside Alara shifted. She'd spent her whole life believing she was damaged, unworthy, something to be used and discarded. But Jake saw something different. He saw a soldier, a partner, someone worth standing beside when the world burned. Then we'd better not die, she said. The house shuddered as something heavy slammed against the door. The siege was just beginning. The smell hit first. Burning oil. Then Alara saw flames spreading across the roof, fed by the wind into something monstrous. The mercenaries had stopped trying to break in. They were burning them out. Smoke poured through the ceiling boards. Jake cursed and moved down from the upper floor, coughing. They had minutes before the heat became unbearable, maybe 20 before the structure collapsed entirely. How much ammunition left? Alara's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Enough for maybe 5 more minutes of fighting. Not enough to hold them off until dawn. The math was simple and brutal. Stay inside and burn. Run outside and get shot. Both options ended the same way. Pemberton had finally backed them into a corner with no escape. Jake reloaded his rifle with mechanical precision, but his hands shook slightly. Not from fear, from fury at failing to protect what was his. The land, the legacy, her. Alara watched him and realized something that should have been obvious months ago. This wasn't just about property. Jake had lost everyone he loved defending this valley, his father, his brother, his uncle. He was preparing to add himself to that list, and the weight of all that death was crushing him. She made a decision that surprised even her. What if we don't defend? Jake looked at her like she'd lost her mind. What if we attack instead? Alara spoke faster, the plan forming as she said it. They expect us to stay inside until we're forced out. We use the smoke as cover and break through. Close quarters, chaos. Their numbers become a liability instead of an advantage. That's insane. Jake stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then something changed in his face. The weight lifted slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. He started to laugh, rough and disbelieving. You're absolutely out of your mind. He checked his rifle one last time. We're getting married again after this, properly, with a preacher and everything. We're already married. That was a business contract. This is different. The roof groaned above them, ready to collapse. Smoke filled the room so thick Alara could barely see Jake 3 feet away. This was it. Live or die in the next 5 minutes. Jake moved to the door, then looked back at her one last time. His eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not calculation or strategy, something raw and honest. Stay close to me. Whatever happens, we face it together. Alara nodded, gripping her rifle tight. Jake kicked the door open and they exploded into hell. The storm swallowed their war cries as they charged into the smoke and chaos, back to back, firing into shadows. This wasn't survival anymore. This was 2 people refusing to die on someone else's terms. The yard became a nightmare of fire and shadow. Visibility measured in feet, rain mixing with smoke to create a suffocating fog. Alara moved on pure instinct, every lesson Jake taught her colliding with desperation. A figure emerged from her left. She fired. He dropped. Jake's gun thundered beside her, so close the muzzle flash lit her peripheral vision. They moved through the chaos like they'd been fighting together for years instead of months. When Jake turned right, she covered left. When she reloaded, he stepped forward to shield her. Something whistled past Alara's ear, too close. She dove behind a water trough, Jake right behind her. His breathing was ragged. "You hit?" "No, you?" "Not yet." A mercenary rushed their position. Alara shot him in the leg. He went down screaming. She'd aimed to wound, not kill, and that decision probably saved her soul. But there wasn't time to think about morality. Another shadow charged from the right. Jake's rifle clicked empty. The attacker raised his gun. Alara fired twice, center mass, exactly like Jake taught her. The man crumpled. She'd just killed someone. The knowledge sat in her stomach like ice, but her hands didn't shake. There'd be time for horror later. Right now, there was only survival. Movement behind Jake. Alara screamed a warning. He spun, but not fast enough. The shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stayed on his feet through pure stubbornness, returning fire one-handed. The mercenary dropped. Jake stumbled. Alara caught him, half dragging him toward the barn foundation. Blood soaked through his shirt, black in the firelight. His face had gone pale. "How bad?" "Bad enough." Jake's voice was tight with pain. "But I've had worse." "Liar." "Yeah." They pressed against the stone foundation, momentarily shielded. The burning house illuminated everything now, turning the storm into an apocalyptic hellscape. Alara counted 4 mercenaries still standing, maybe 5. Her ammunition was almost gone. Jake tried to raise his rifle and nearly passed out. Alara pushed him back down. "Stay, I'll handle this." "Like hell. You can barely stand." She checked her revolver, 3 bullets left. "So shut up and let me work." Something flickered across Jake's face. Pride maybe, or love, probably both. He grabbed her wrist with his good hand. "Alara, if this goes wrong, I need you to know something. We're not dying tonight, so save the speeches." "I chose right." He said it fiercely, like a declaration. "You were always the right choice." Before she could respond, footsteps approached through the smoke. Multiple sets. The final push. Alara raised her weapon and stepped between Jake and whatever was coming. 3 bullets against 4 men. The math didn't work. But she was done running from bad odds. The footsteps stopped, then retreated. Alara kept her weapon raised, confused until she heard it. Horses, lots of them, riding hard away from the property. The mercenaries were running. Dawn broke through the storm clouds, revealing the aftermath. 4 bodies in the yard. The house reduced to a smoking skeleton, spent shell casings everywhere. Jake leaned against the foundation, bleeding but alive. Alara's hands finally started shaking now that the fighting was over. They sat in silence, watching the sunrise, too exhausted for words. Then a single horse approached. Alara raised her revolver, but Jake put his hand over hers. That's Pemberton. Alone. The railroad baron rode into the devastated yard looking worse than they did. His expensive suit was mud-splattered, his confidence shaken. He dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty. "Mr. Jones. Mrs. Jones." His voice lacked its usual smoothness. "I've come to negotiate terms." Jake tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Alara caught him, kept him upright. Little late for that. Perhaps. Pemberton looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. "My men failed. Worse, your prolonged gunfight drew attention from the territorial marshal's office. They're asking questions I'd rather not answer." "Good," Alara said coldly. "I'm prepared to offer a different arrangement." Pemberton pulled papers from his coat. "I'll drop all claims to this land and provide documentation clearing the blood clause. In exchange, I want right-of-way for a single rail line across your northern section, 20 yards wide. Fair market compensation." Jake's laugh was bitter. "You murder my family, burn my house, and now want to buy a railroad easement?" "Yes." Pemberton met his eyes directly. "Because the alternative is a federal investigation that ruins us both. You get your land free and clear. I get my rail line. We both survive." The offer hung in the scorched air. Alara watched Jake process it, saw the war between pride and pragmatism playing across his face. Pemberton was still stealing from them, just legally now. But they'd survive. The land would survive. Jake looked at Alara. She nodded once. "Your call, but I'm done fighting for today." Jake turned back to Pemberton. "We negotiate terms with our lawyer present, every detail in writing. You deviate 1 inch from the contract, and I'll make sure the marshal knows everything." "Agreed." "And Pemberton?" Jake's voice went cold. "You ever threaten my wife again? Federal investigation or not, I'll kill you myself." The Baron mounted his horse without argument and rode away. When he disappeared over the ridge, Jake finally let himself collapse. Alara caught him, lowered him carefully to the ground. "We won," she said, but it felt hollow. "We survived." Jake's eyes were already closing from blood loss. That's close enough. 6 months later, the house stood rebuilt. Stronger walls, better sight lines, but this time with curtains in the windows and flowers by the door. Small things that meant they were living instead of just surviving. Alara never got pregnant during those desperate first months, and when she finally admitted her relief to Jake, he laughed. "Good," he said. "I was terrified you'd have a baby while learning to reload under fire." The blood clause got cleared through legal channels properly documented. No loopholes for Pemberton to exploit later. The railroad ran its line across the northern section exactly as contracted. Some mornings Alara heard the train whistle and thought about how much blood had been spilled over 20 yards of dirt. Jake's shoulder healed crooked but functional. He never talked about that night, but sometimes Alara woke to find him standing at the window, rifle in hand, checking the horizon out of habit. Those nights she'd get up and stand beside him until he remembered the war was over. They did get married again, properly, with a traveling preacher and witnesses from town. Jake insisted on it. Said the first ceremony was a business transaction, but this one was a choice. Alara wore a dress she actually liked, and when Jake said his vows, there were no clauses about heirs or property, just two people choosing each other after surviving hell together. Children came eventually. 3 years later, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. Jake taught her to shoot at age 6, same way he taught Alara. When neighbors commented it wasn't proper for girls, Alara just smiled. "Proper doesn't keep you alive," she'd say. The valley prospered slowly. Other families moved in once Pemberton stopped terrorizing the territory. The land that had been paid for in blood became just land again, valuable but not worth dying over. Sometimes that felt wrong, like the cost had been too high for something so ordinary. But late evenings when Jake sat on the rebuilt porch watching the sunset, Alara understood. It was never about the land. It was about refusing to let someone else dictate the terms of your life, about standing when running would be easier, about finding someone who saw your scars and called them strength. She thought about that original question sometimes. Will you bear my sons? Jake hadn't been asking about children. He'd been asking if she was strong enough to build something worth defending in a world trying to tear it down. Her answer, delivered through actions instead of words, had been yes. Not as obligation, as choice. The land bore their name now, truly earned. And every morning when Alara woke beside the man who'd seen her as a soldier instead of damaged goods, she knew they'd won something more valuable than property. They'd won the right to live on their own terms. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another incredible story about a woman who discovers her quiet librarian husband has been hiding a dangerous secret that will change everything. You won't want to miss it.